Welcome. Welcome, everybody. You are signed on to the first webinar of a four-part series. The series is titled Lead Generating Webinars for Manufacturing Companies, a how-to series. This first webinar is titled Getting Started with Lead Generating Webinars. If you attend or listen to all four of these webinars in the series, by the end of the series, you will be fully equipped to create and produce and measure your own educational webinars. Educational webinars can generate hundreds, in some cases, and we'll hear about one later in the webinar, thousands of leads to fill your top of your sales funnel. Just to put a little background to it, in a recent survey conducted by Content Marketing Institute and Adobe about webinars, they asked the people in the audience about their experience with webinars. They found that 2/3 of B2B or business-to-business marketers have tried webinars as part of their marketing mix. And this is consistent with the results we got in the pre-webinar survey. Of those 2/3 who tried them, most of them quit because they found them ineffective in generating leads or generating interest. But the interesting point is that 75% of those people in B2B who tried webinars built their webinars around their product, whether it was product training or whether it was a product launch, something like that. This is not uncommon. Typically, people like to talk about their product and their company. And we're going to show you later on in this webinar why that doesn't work and how to explain to your stakeholders why it doesn't work. I'll give you an example, personal example. I was the marketing director for a company that manufactured electronic measurement instruments. I went and talked to the product manager when I first started the job. I said, what about webinars? Maybe we should try some of these webinars. This was 7 or 8 years ago, so it was when they were just coming onto the scene. Product manager told me, we tried webinars, doesn't work. They sent an email to 20,000 people in the database. They had about 15 people register and about 3 people show up. The subject of the webinar, new product launch. I suggested, hey, let's turn it around. Let's teach them about something that challenges them. Product manager said, okay. Sent out the same invitation, 20,000 people, 1,500 people signed up for that webinar. That's 100 times improvement. Product-based webinar versus educational webinar. And we'll show you in this series how to do your own webinars, how to get these kind of results. That's what we're going to teach you. How to add hundreds, if not thousands, of prospects into your sales funnel. Speaking today, my name is Bruce McDuffie. I'm the principal consultant for KMI, Knowledge Marketing for Industry, bringing about 20 plus years of experience in B2B sales and marketing, primarily in the industrial sector. And one thing I've learned over the years is that product marketing doesn't work that great. But helping your customers be better or educating them about something that they struggle with, that works. That builds a business. My co-presenter today is Dan Levy. Dan has worked as a marketing strategist and a content developer for 25 years or more in the myriad industry segments. His career has been focused on helping manufacturers find their stories and tell them in a way that engages, educates, and enlightens customers and prospects alike. Now we're going to jumpstart the learning curve, and Dan's going to kick off our first topic with housekeeping and what it means. Dan?
Absolutely. Thanks, Bruce. When it comes to webinars, and we've all been to 100, if not 1,000 of them, they always open with this notion of housekeeping, and they always seem to call it housekeeping. That seems to be the term that has really sort of taken hold of these ideas. And so I want to not only address the housekeeping issues for this webinar, but I want to give you a little bit of a teaser about the importance of these seeming housekeeping issues. So let me run through these questions very quickly. Will we get a copy of the recorded webinar? Absolutely. We will make it available to you so that you can watch it again, forward it to colleagues, do whatever you would like to with it. That's great. Can you ask questions? Yes, and please do. There's a chat box in the lower left-hand corner of the screen. Please send us your questions. We've built in time to answer questions about halfway through, and then again at the end, we want to take some questions as well. So please don't hesitate to send us those as we go through the webinar today. It'll be really great to help make it a very interactive sort of discussion as opposed to a presentation. And will we be able to get a copy of the slides? You bet. We will make those available on SlideShare, and we'll make sure that you get a link to those as well. But as I mentioned just a few seconds ago, there's a larger point to some of these housekeeping issues. And as Bruce and I go through not only this webinar today, but the rest of them in the series, we want to start to get you thinking not so much as attendees, but as webinar producers. And these seemingly simple housekeeping items, which are very nice to haves for attendees to make it more convenient for them, are really quite important if you're a producer. For example, they can serve as really vital signs of the success of your webinar, especially point number 2. If you're getting questions along the way, you're understanding how people are interpreting the information that you're giving out. You're hearing their questions, so you understand what's important, what's not, what points you're making, that kind of thing. But certainly, and we'll talk about this a little bit later on too, webinars live well beyond the hour or so that you dedicate to the actual event. And so these kinds of things, especially points 1 and 3, are excellent for that. So we'll get into a lot more detail there, but anyway, just these housekeeping items are not only covered for this webinar, but I think we want to talk about in the future how important they can be in terms of judging your success. But today we're not really focused on those sorts of things. Really, we want to talk about a different way to think and a different way to approach, as Bruce has kind of alluded to in the intro. So I'll turn it back over to him to sort of talk about how the rest of the hour will be broken out.
Thanks, Dan. The agenda today, number 1, we're going to talk about planning. Plan the webinar and work the plan. We're going to show you a checklist that we'll make available to everybody. Checklist that shows every detail from start to finish for planning, producing, executing, and measuring your webinar. As with any event, planning and details are prominent in success. Second part of this webinar, we're going to talk about finding the best topic, and this is really the meat of this webinar. Finding the best topic for maximum engagement with your target audience. We'll give you some tools to define your best topic for your webinar series. And finally, number 3, we're going to teach you why educational topics work and product-based topics do not work. And we're going to show you how you can explain this concept to your sales and other stakeholders, and why you can how you can explain to them, here's why we're doing an educational topic, and here's why we're not talking about your product during this webinar. And Dan would like to go over some takeaways. Here's what we'd like you to get out of this webinar today.
Really, we want to make sure that you guys walk away with 4 things today. Not only the importance of using the webinar checklist to put a plan in action, but we've actually we're going to give you one. Bruce is going to walk through one that's fantastic that you can then download and start to tailor and use to your own benefit as you plan webinars moving forward. Finding the sweet spot topic that will get you more registrants. Bruce has already alluded a little bit to how we're going to get to that, but there's a really great exercise that has been proven to work not only when Bruce has done webinars, when I've done webinars, but even when we've worked together. The process for finding the topic and the exercise to go through that is going to be great. We're going to give you the tools to walk away with that as well. Define a mission statement for your webinar series. Mission and vision statements oftentimes are seen as fluff, but really what the example that we've got today, we've even got some templates that we'll give you to start to develop your own mission statement. There's a real practical value to them, and so we want to talk through why they're important and how they can be a really useful tool moving forward. And then, as Bruce just mentioned, we want you to be able to articulate why educational topics outperform product topics. And again, not only will we walk you through a couple of examples and sort of show you how to find those topics, but really near the end, Bruce has got some wonderful slides that if you want to download this deck from SlideShare, that you can almost take those last probably 4 or 5 slides that we'll go through and put them up in front of your own leadership or your own marketing team and really walk them through and explain to them, just as we're going to explain to you, the value of educational topics and how those are really going to blow your webinars wide open. So I think that's enough setup. Bruce, why don't we go ahead and just get started?
Okay.
Thanks, Dan. That was a good overview of the takeaways, and we hope we'll go over those again at the end of the webinar and see how we did. So this first step is to make a plan. I recommend that you use the checklist that we put together and we made available for download. If you didn't get the checklist, just shoot me an email and we'll email that over to you so you can have it to use. It's a pretty comprehensive checklist. The important thing, though, is even if you don't use this checklist, make sure you plan the webinar series, plan each webinar, and then work that plan. As with any event, there's hundreds of details that need to be taken care of to ensure success. I like checklists. Maybe it's from my old Navy days where we did everything with a checklist, whether it was anchoring or coming into port or getting underway. Everything had a checklist, so you don't miss anything. When I was a new ensign in the Navy, as long as we're talking about that, I was 23 years old, assigned to a ship, and I had a couple of chiefs, senior enlisted guys that worked for me, and one of the first things they told me about was the 5 Ps. The 5 Ps are proper planning prevents poor performance, and that certainly applies to webinars too. You can go to knowledgemarketing.com/webinar toolkit and download the checklist directly. There's no registration or anything required. Just go ahead and feel free to visit there and get that checklist. We'll go over the different parts of creating and producing, executing and measuring each webinar in the next couple of webinars we do next month. But in brief, the checklist covers 6 basic areas. Number 1 is startup, and this is where you determine your objectives, you align your stakeholders, you specify your budget, you put your foundation in place in the startup. And as with anything, strong foundation is critically important. Second step is branding. You'll decide how you will position your webinar, how you will present it, the face of your webinar to your audience. You'll build all the templates, the tools, the email templates, the landing page templates and such. For emails, you'll build a template for your slides. Decide if you want to have a separate brand or a special logo for your webinars. Webinar titles, descriptions, things like that. So your tools that you'll use to describe your webinar series to your audience. Number 3, you'll choose your team. The team is critically important. You'll choose your speakers, your moderator, your experts, your promotion manager, and so on. You need strong commitments from your experts and your speakers. Number 4 is your tools. You'll need some tools to execute the webinar. For example, a webinar platform. You'll need tools to promote your webinar. You'll need tools for measurement. It's important to understand that you have the adequate tools to produce your webinar as well as provide leads into your sales funnel. Number 5 is promotion. It doesn't do much good to create a beautiful educational webinar and not tell people about it. So number 5 is to make your promotion plan. And number 6 is the webinar execution itself. We actually have a webinar checklist for the day of the webinar. I don't have that in the slides, but I can send that to you if you like. the actual execution and follow-up of the webinar. We'll talk more about that also in a future webinar. The next step is finding the best topic. We call it the sweet spot, and we also encourage making a webinar mission statement. And the best topic depends on your objective. For example, if objective is top of the funnel, filling new leads, reactivating a dormant database, then your best topic is going to be educational. There are some cases where you will use product-based webinars, but it's separate, either funnel conversion or training for existing customers. We're not talking about that. Today we're talking about educational webinars to engage with your target audience and to get them interested in your company because you're offering them something of value. To identify your target audience, the first thing you want to do is define the segment. You could talk about the industry, you could talk about geography, you can define it by the title of the person you want to talk to or gain engagement with. You can segment by size of the company, whether it's revenue or whether it's number of employees. That's all academic. The important thing about your target audience is you want to know where they go for their information, so you can be in the place they go to get the information. One question you can ask to answer that first question is, who else owns this audience? If your target audience is meteorologists and you want to sell them a weather radar, where do the meteorologists go to get their information? That's where you want to engage with them, unless you already own the audience, of course. You need to be able to define the characteristic of the audience as far as what do they struggle with, what's their pain, or what's their passion. So you have to have a two-way communication venue available somehow. You can gain this venue with first-party research, third-party research. You can talk to your salespeople. You can talk to your customer service team. Anyone who faces the customer, you have an opportunity to learn about your target audience, common characteristics, common pains, common passions. So now you've identified your target audience, and as far as who they are by segment, your next step is to identify what issues they face. What is their pain? What is their challenge or their passion? We're going to do that with this diagram that you see in front of you. On the left-hand side, you can't really see it very good, but it says identify the pain or passion of your target audience. On the right-hand side over here, we are considering your expertise or the experts in your company. And what we're looking for is the intersection of those two things, the pain or passion of your target audience and the expertise of your company. Bottom line, give them something they can use. Don't talk about your product, give them something they can use. So let's take a look at this left-hand circle where we're investigating the pain or the passion of our target audience. It's very important to look at this section from the audience's perspective. Who knows what WIFM, W-I-I-F-M, means? If you don't know what it means, it stands for What's in it for me. And what's in it for me is not about your company and you. It's about your audience asking themselves that question. What's in it for me? Why should I watch your webinar? Why should I look at your video? Why should I read your white paper? It has to be something in it from them. And that's where you learn about their pain or their passion. The first impulse you will have, and your stakeholders will definitely have, is, yes, their pain is that they don't use our product. Or their passion is that they don't use our product. Wrong. That's the perspective from your company. Look at it as if you were in the audience yourself. Another question you can ask yourself on behalf of the audience is, why should I care If I'm in your target audience, why should I care about you or your company? And again, it's not about your product or your people or your CEO. The reason I should care is it'll do something for me. Your audience is self-centered. Treat them that way. Give them something they can use. Give them something they can learn from. Give them something that helps them have more fun with their passion. That's how you have to look at it when you're thinking about what is their problem. Now we're going to look at the other side of the circle, the expertise. When you're talking about expertise, you're talking about the experts in your company, not the expertise in building your product. Let's just stipulate that we're all experts at our product. We're experts at building that product. So let's set that aside for a moment and say, what underlying expertise do we have present in our company? If the expertise is unique, maybe it's the world-leading, renowned expert, something like that, that's great. It's probably not going to be unique, but it's great if it is. You want to position your expertise and your experts as the go-to place for the people in your target audience. When they have a certain problem, you want them to think of you top of mind as a solution provider to their problem. And they may not ever buy your product, but if they see you as an expert in a particular problem they face, you become top of mind and you become credible. So when the day does come around and they're ready to buy the product that you or the service that you sell, you're probably going to get the business because you've already established yourself. Where are these experts? Where can you find them in your company? Well, a great place to look is product managers. Another great place to look is your R&D team. Customer service many times has great experts. Your engineers who design your products, they're often great experts. One place I would say to avoid is choosing salespeople as experts. And the reason is not because I have anything against salespeople. I was a salesperson for many years myself in the field. But salespeople have a hard time not talking about their product. Even if they promise they won't talk about the product, when they get up in front of a group of people, whether it's in a webinar or in a seminar or in front of any audience, the pressure's on. They will always default to talking about their product. Now, you may have a gem of a salesperson who can do it, then that's great, but it's unique. So if you're talking to salespeople about being an expert, being a speaker, about something where you educate your audience, and you're not going to talk about your product, make sure the salesperson can really do it, even if they say they can. Okay, so we've got our target audience defined, and we're looking at this sweet spot, right? The intersection of the pain or passion of your target audience and the expertise of your firm and the people in your firm. That's what we're focusing on. We call it the sweet spot. And this intersection can help your target audience, can help the people in your target audience be better at something. It can help them have less pain, or it can intensify their passion. And this intersection is your sweet spot, and this is where you can really mine the gold for your content marketing and your webinars, your educational webinars. The sweet spot can also define your entire content marketing mission. But for the purposes of webinars, this is where we'll focus. The sweet spot, again, the intersection of the pain or passion of your target audience, and it has to be your target audience, meaning someday they'll be able to buy what you sell, and your expertise. And again, your expertise is not about your product. It's not about building your product. It's about an underlying expertise that is required to build a product that does solve a problem.
Hey,
Here's your
Bruce,
diagram.
before
Yeah,
we
Dan,
move
go
on,
ahead.
can I jump in with a quick point?
Sure,
Sorry, I didn't mean to step
absolutely.
on you there. But when you're evaluating and you're looking for the sweet spot, we can leave it right on this diagram. But one of the things that we all read books to try and help us be smarter. And you've got books on your shelf, but I keep a handful of books on my desk because I always want them within arm's reach. And one of those books that has been on my desk for a couple of years is Made to Stick by Dan and Chip Heath. And if anyone out there who hasn't read that book, it's a fantastic read. But one of the things when they're talking about what makes ideas sticky and valuable to people, one of the things they talk about that gets in the way of that is the curse of knowledge, and they talk about it quite a bit in that book. And I think as marketers and communicators, sometimes we are victims of that because we know just enough about the product and we know just enough about the market that we've got so much information going around in our heads all the time that it becomes very difficult to essentially shelve all that knowledge, so that as we're evaluating pain points and passion points, as you were talking about in the previous slide, and if we're evaluating what the sweet spot is, it becomes very, very difficult, probably more than anyone really gives it credit for, to really step outside of our own knowledge base and say, is this truly going to hit a pain point or a passion point? So I just wanted to reiterate that, because to the points that you were making earlier, Bruce, about talking to the product people, talking to the frontline customer service people, talking to customers, and really trying to put your own knowledge aside and really truly listen to what they tell you is really going to make not only the evaluation of a sweet spot topic, I think, a lot more effective, but I think it's just going to make the webinars more effective in the long run. So I think it's just a really important point that just really needed to be emphasized. So with that, I'll let you carry on. Thanks for letting me jump in.
Webinars about fundamentals always do the best. I was working with a company a few months ago, and we came up with a topic that their customer service people said customers were always asking about, and it was 4 to 20 milliamp process signals. And they said, I suggested, how about that for a webinar topic? And they said, oh, everyone knows about that. It's so basic. There's really no need to teach about that. And I said, well, let's try it. Let's try a webinar series teaching people about 4 to 20 milliamp signals. And sure enough, it was a big hit. First webinar had 600 plus registrants, where, by the way, their past webinars were all about products and would get a maximum of 10 registrants. So that's really important. Fundamental series work fantastic. So let's look at a couple of examples about how this works in practice. The first one is an experience I had. I was working with a company who made humidity measurement devices. Pretty boring stuff, but important. We looked at the target audience of companies like pharmaceutical, drug manufacturers, semiconductor manufacturing, where the environment, the air, and the gas around these processes and in the storage areas are critically important. One, to maintain the life of the product, and to make sure the process remains relevant. So we found out that humidity is a very difficult measurement for these folks. They have a very hard time making a reliable and repeatable and an accurate measurement. And if they don't have a reliable measurement, they can get in trouble, for example, with the FDA, or they can lose wafers. It can cost them a lot of money without an accurate measurement. So we said, okay, what is our expertise at this company? Well, the company makes humidity measurement devices. Turns out they had some of the world's best and well-known experts about the science of humidity in the world. And these experts knew everything there is to know about water vapor in air and gas and how to make a measurement. So it turns out that the sweet spot was teaching the people in the target audience at these drug companies and semiconductor manufacturing companies about humidity. Teach them about the science behind humidity. and the technologies about measuring it, the pros and cons, what can affect certain types of sensors. We educated them about the science of humidity and how to make a better measurement. So by making a better measurement, things become more reliable. Now Dan has an example where somebody about a passion and how a company helps them improve, increase their passion. Dan?
Absolutely. Thanks, Bruce. I do quite a bit of work in the aviation industry. I've got my pilot's license myself. I truly enjoy it, so I'm one of those lucky people that gets to combine their professions with their passion. One of my clients is the premier chart maker, aviation chart maker, aeronautical chart maker in the world. And as we were working to put together a webinar series for them, we wanted to talk to some of the general aviation pilots, folks who fly the airplane like you see there on the screen. And we know that they love to fly. But the other thing that they love about flying is that it really challenges them to be their best. It really challenges their skills. Aviation is sort of an art and a science. And so we knew that we had that passion to work with. And so we wanted to tap into that. At the same time, as I just mentioned before, my client that I was working with, they make the world's best aeronautical charts. And obviously they want to sell more charts and have more folks sign up and subscribe to their charts. So when we put those two things together, when we looked for where that sweet spot was, we developed a webinar series that used the charting developed by my client to show pilots how to be better, how to better fly their planes, how to be safer, how to be more efficient, more effective, have more fun. And it was, as Bruce mentioned a couple of minutes ago, it was one of those. It was sort of a combination of tips and tricks, but it was also a basics review. Which, when we got some feedback from our attendees later, who had gone to it, they said, this was a great review. I just appreciated having that part of it, much less the tips and tricks. And so we put together a 5-part webinar series, and we had over 10,000 registrants. And so that was very, very successful, and obviously that we were very happy with those results. And we had taken that educational focus that we're talking about here. We'd really leveraged that sweet spot. So that's just another example of how this process and how this way of thinking about webinars works so well. And really, developing the sweet spot is very important. But I think the success really comes from really applying some vision and focus to that sweet spot. So I want to turn it back to Bruce to talk just a little bit about the practical value of the mission statement.
Great. That was a fantastic example, Dan. And that's the one I mentioned when I did the intro to the webinar, where this company got thousands of people to register for an educational webinar. Very powerful. And I think, if I recall, that company had tried product-based webinars, new product launches in the past, where they had gotten, I think, a maximum of 30 or 40 people to attend. So your mission statement. The mission statement is a statement derived from that sweet spot. For example, we help the people in our target audience to be better something. Or by sharing our expertise about blank, the people in our target audience are more efficient something. Or the two examples we just saw, for example, for humidity measurement, the mission statement is to help the people in our target audience make a more reliable, dependable, accurate, and repeatable measurement. Or for the example Dan just talked about with pilots, the mission statement is simply, we help pilots to be better pilots. Again, fanning that passion. It's important to focus the mission statement, again, from the audience perspective. It's not like your company mission statement. We're going to be the best, the leading this and that. The mission is about how to help the target audience. So it's important to keep with them, or why should I care, in mind. Again, when you're deriving this from the sweet spot, don't fall back on the mission of the company. And as you have success with these educational webinars, You'll have people come to you after a time and they'll say, hey, we should do a webinar about this, or we should do a webinar about that. If it doesn't fit the mission statement for your webinar series or your content marketing, don't do it.
I think one of the things about mission statement too that can be really important is, you know, if you look through your company or even your marketing or comms departments, webinar production does not appear on anybody's job description. But yet it is truly a team sport. You may need leadership buy-in to get resources or time or people. You may need to approach the subject matter experts and say, hey, I need your help with this. You may have to go to procurement to get a service like we're using today with ReadyTalk. If you're in marketing, you may have to work with comms. If you're in comms, you may have to work with marketing or art. Even within your own team that's already probably being overworked, and you come in and you say, hey, let's do webinars. I think I got a key here to really drive some people. They're going to look at you like, are you crazy? And so a mission statement, at least I found through my experience, is a clearly defined mission statement can be a fantastic way to sell this into the organization, so that if you got to go to those folks who need to give you time or talent or treasure, if you've got a really clear mission statement and you can put that up on the wall or hand it to them and really use that as a way to sell it in, people can very quickly grasp onto, oh, I understand what you're trying to do. I see the value of what you're trying to do. So, yeah, I'll give you the resources you need, or I'll lend you that expert and some of the time, because they may have to pull them off of another project. But because you're clear in your mission and your vision, they're much more apt to allow those kinds of activities that you need to take place. And then it also kind of makes them feel good, once you have some success, that, oh, yeah, we were part of that. We knew what they were trying to get done. So that's the other part of, I think, a mission statement is it really can become kind of a little bit of a sales tool for you inside your organization. So that's kind of the point I wanted to make there.
Okay, those are great points again, Dan. So I think we have some questions out there. Some questions are coming in from the audience. And don't anybody leave. We've got a great section coming up here before we quit about how to explain product marketing versus educational marketing. Dan, questions?
Well, absolutely. And in looking through some of the questions we get here, I've got to admit, I'm going to pick out two quick ones that I think are probably on a lot of people's minds, at least from what we're seeing here. And I think there'll also be a good setup for the next section that we want to talk about. So the first one, just paraphrasing a little bit here, what I'm seeing is that people are sort of commenting that, hey, the sweet spot is great, but how do we take this educational idea back into a culture where, as soon as this webinar is over, we're back selling products. So how do we start to really introduce this idea? So maybe we could Bruce, maybe talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, that's a very common question, Dan. And it's a tough one because manufacturing companies are built around a product. Sometimes 50, 60, 80, 100 years of culture are built up around that product. And your sales team and your product team, they live that product. Sometimes they live and they breathe that product. So it's a very difficult culture to change. When you start devoting resources, whether it's time or money, or time and or money, people might question you. They say, why are we spending time giving away our information? That's a pretty common one. We're giving away our information for free. And you need to be able to explain why that's a better way to engage with your audience than talking about your product. But it is a culture change. I suggest starting with a pilot program. And webinar series or educational webinar series are a great pilot program to start with because you get numbers you can show. You can show, for example, like I talked about earlier, hey, this product launch webinar, we invited the same bunch of people and 10 people signed up. And then we did this educational webinar where we educated them about how to make a better measurement, and we had 500 people show up. That'll get people's attention. And that's why I like webinars as a pilot program. It doesn't have to be webinars. It could be an e-newsletter. It could be something where you have numbers. That's the best way to get a pilot going so you can start to make a change in that culture. But yeah, it's a culture change.
The other thing that I wanted to just touch on briefly, and again, this is probably me being a little bit selfish and picking some topics based upon some interests of my own, but you sort of go back to the very title of this webinar, and the very premise that we're putting together is really lead generation. And the ultimate sort of next step off of lead generation is sales. So even though we're talking about education in this first webinar, we don't want to lose sight of sales. So where does sales come in all of this?
Well, it's certainly important to recognize that most manufacturing companies are in business to make a profit, in business to drive revenue, to sell something at a profit and keep cash flowing. So sales is definitely important. And the place where sales comes in is that they're going to get more inquiries, they're going to have more opportunities, they're going to have more questions from their audience because of these educational webinars. And it's because of the engagement. You're going to talk to more people, get in front of more people, get the interest of more people in your target audience by doing this type of marketing and using an educational webinar. But there's a couple of things to note. You get the engagement with education, and as people get to know your company, they investigate the website, they look at other assets and other content. You can do a lead scoring program that measures their activity and their profile, and by getting a high enough score, then the contact pops over to sales. That's a pretty typical example.
Well, great. Hey, we're running up against it here, and I want to make sure that we get to what I think is probably the most important. If you only walk away from this webinar with one idea today, it's what I think you're going to learn over the next couple of minutes. So, Bruce, let's jump right back into this, and we'll address some questions here towards the end. And assuming we've got time, we'll try and hit the questions we can. And if we can't, please know that we'll get back to you after the webinar so that we can make sure we do talk to everybody. So, Bruce, let's talk about education a little bit and dive into that topic a little bit more.
Well, if you're like most manufacturing companies out there, and you're built, as I mentioned, around a product, you're going to get the question. You're going to get some pushback. Why are you talking about education and not the products? Well, I have a favorite saying. It's product marketing fails where educational marketing sails. This is a great image to keep in your mind as your educational marketing skims across the waves. So here's why it works. When you put out a product-based message, very, very few people in your target audience are in a buying mode when they see that message. Probably less than 0.2% happen to be in a place and a time and a mindset where they're ready to buy your product and hear your message. So you're having 99% plus of the people in your target audience who may someday buy what you have, but on that particular day, they see your product-based message, they discount it, and they subconsciously, in some cases, rack it up in their minds as spam or noise, and they ignore it. You don't want them to start ignoring your brand. So that's why product marketing fails, because people just aren't in the mode. Now, if you have hundreds of millions of dollars like Oracle, for example, yeah, you can get your message out there, but it's expensive, and you have to be very relentless. So here's why educational marketing sales. Because if you're talking to a target audience about something that matters to them, if you've chosen your target audience correctly, then there's a common thing that they face as a group. Having to make, for example, humidity. Humidity is a tough measurement. This is a common theme for that humidity instrument company. For general aviation pilots, they want to be better pilots. It's a common theme. And if you talk to them about this common theme, you'll engage in a much, much larger percentage of your audience. If you have somebody really pushing back and saying it's a stupid idea, here's a little story you can tell them. Say, okay, let's say you have your local arena here in Denver, it's the Pepsi Center, and you've got 18,000 people in there who are all your target audience. You've got 5 minutes in front of them. What are you going to say? Well, your product manager and your sales guys will say, well, I'm going to tell them about our features and our benefits and why we're so great. And you're not going to get but maybe 10 people who can actually have an interest out of that 18,000. But if you talk about something that they commonly struggle with, you'll engage with a much, much larger audience. Dan, we're going to talk about the sales funnel now and how this matches to that. Dan, I think you had a few comments about that.
Oh, I love this idea, the sales funnel idea, and I think it really helps to kind of grab and sort of capture really what we've been talking about here over the last 45, almost 50 minutes. And, you know, one of the things that we want you guys to keep in mind or to think about is that in this digital era, in this content marketing era, that depending on the statistics that you look at, anywhere from 55, 57 to 70% of the sales process has taken place before you are even aware that someone is interested. And that's because people are online, they're in chat groups, they're looking for information, they're trying to be smarter about it. And so one of the reasons I wanted to show this is because lead generation, it really starts up here at this kind of educational level here on top. And there's a reason that it's the widest and the biggest part of the funnel, as you can see there, because education starts to become so important. And one of the reasons I think educational webinars are such a great place to really look and to start the webinar process is because if you are not playing in this funnel at all because people are so focused on product or education just isn't a priority, you could be missing a big chunk of the sales process because you're not there and your competitors are, because they're going through the sweet spot exercise or they're finding some of those educational things. So it's really important to keep this in mind, and I think I have used this when I have sold in or when I have had challenges with people talking about, well, I don't want to educate, I just want to sell. Well, you know, take a look at this sales funnel, and this is maybe another reason to download this presentation off of SlideShare, because you can sit with someone in management or someone in leadership and really sort of walk them through. And the example that kind of comes to mind is, you know, my wife and I are thinking about buying another car, and we've not owned a hybrid before, and so we've been talking about that. So if I want to start to understand what it's like to own a hybrid car, I'm going to be up here in this part of the funnel because I just want to get some basic understanding. So if I'm Toyota, for example, and I'm not necessarily picking on Toyota, but if I'm somebody up here who's still learning and Toyota's coming to me and saying, buy a Prius, buy a Prius, buy a Prius, you know, no, I'm not ready for that yet. I don't care about that. But help me understand, get me comfortable with the idea of being a hybrid owner. Okay, great. I thank you for educating me, Toyota or whomever, Car and Driver, you know, any of those sources. I think I am interested in having a hybrid car. Now we start to move down into these areas where then I think we can get into that place where if you're Toyota, you can show up and sort of say, hey, you know, let's talk about what makes the Prius just a little bit better. So there certainly are places for education and there are places for sales. And I think the other thing, and we'll get to this probably in later webinars, but there's almost sort of a circular pattern that can start to take place down here in the sales funnel, wherein once somebody makes a purchase, then you want to continue the product-based or even the educationally based webinars, because you're going to have upsell opportunities, cross-sell opportunities, resale opportunities. You know, so if I've got a Prius and it, you know, I've used it up in 5 or 7 years, if you're Toyota, you probably want to keep me interested and in the loop so that when it comes time to buy a new car, content has helped solidify the repurchase decision that I would go back to Toyota in that example. So in addition to what Bruce has shown you in a couple previous slides about the interest and the ability, I think the sales funnel is also a really fantastic tool to use there. So hey, it looks like we're kind of getting quick on time, so I'm going to wrap up this part of it, and Bruce, we'll kind of turn it back to you to get this couple final comments made.
Hey, yeah, Dan, that what you just said about the funnel, I wanted to add a few more things to that. You know, with before we move on, with educational webinars, they're best at engaging with the target audience and filling that top of the funnel. But they are relevant down here in the lower part of the funnel. If you've got a prospective customer, you've got a great opportunity, your salesperson's been talking to them, they're in the short selection phase, they've got 2 or 3 companies down on the short list. Educational webinars can help them choose your company to do business with. And it can be very effective that way. Think about it. If you're a company out there and you've got 2 or 3 final selectees where you're going to make a large purchase, and one of the companies has offered you some helpful information about how to measure humidity or something like that, it's going to sway them, and it can very well get you the business. There's no question about it. So educational webinars do work in the lower parts of the funnel as well. So I'll have a few closing comments here. It was Albert Einstein who famously said, well, at least it's famous now, he said, insanity is defined as doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So if your company is out there and you're a manufacturing company and you're struggling to grow 1% to 3% or struggling even to hold your market share, it's time to do something different. And educational webinars or educational content marketing is something different. It goes against your product culture. It goes against many of the things that your stakeholders like sales and product and research and development believe. But do something different. Why not? Okay, so let's summarize. Today we went over 3 basic areas. We talked about the planning, making a plan and working the plan, having a checklist to make sure you get all the details covered. There's nothing worse than arriving at the day of the webinar and forgetting a detail because you're on, the show's on, the show must go on. So use a checklist. Use the one that I provide or KMI provides, or make your own. Find a relevant topic. We talked about locating your sweet spot for a webinar topic, webinar series, how we look at the pain or passion of the target audience, and we look at our expertise and experts within the company, and we find that overlap. And then we talked about why educational topics work. We've given you some ideas when somebody does come and push back, and you can explain why educational topics work. So Dan, how did we do on the takeaways?
Absolutely. These are the same list of takeaways that we talked about at the very beginning. And so I want to go through and make sure that we sort of, as Bruce and I talked about, did we deliver on our promise here? And I hope that we did. The first one is, use the checklist to, to put your plan into action. I think Bruce did a nice job of not only covering that and the value of that to make sure that you've got all your I's dotted and T's crossed, but please, this is a great opportunity to go to the website, and we'll give you that address in a minute, and so you can download that checklist, and I think actually, maybe even start to use it and shape it and make it your own a little bit. The second one, find the sweet spot topic to get you more registrants. And again, I know I'm pushing here for a lot of downloads, but go to SlideShare and get this deck. And if nothing else, just isolate that one slide that had the Venn diagram on it with the 2 circles, and print it out. Make copies. Give it to your team. Put it up on the a screen somewhere if you and your team want to brainstorm, or even just put it up on the whiteboard. And I think I think you'll find great success there. Define a mission statement for your webinar series. We gave a couple of great, not only examples from experiences that Bruce and I have had, but even a couple of kind of almost fill in the blank to kind of get your creative juices flowing a little bit there. So be sure to take advantage of that. And then finally, learn, why educational topics outperform product topics. I think the last 4 or 5 slides that we've gone through here really do a good job of that, or at least I hope they do. So we think they do anyway. So I think we've hit everything that we wanted to cover in this webinar. I hope those 4 takeaways are crystal clear for all of you as well. And Bruce, it looks like we've got maybe time for one final question before we wrap up. And again, just looking through, I think it appears are taking to this notion of change, but the idea of change is a little bit scary. So I think sort of the one issue that I've kind of ferreted out here is how this is a lot of work to think this way and to get the SMEs on board and to put everything together, the deck, et cetera. Is there life beyond webinars? Are there other things we can do with this information? How can we really maximize the effort and the output from the webinars that we're asking people to put together?
Well, there's a secret to effective and efficient educational knowledge or content marketing, and that is to repurpose. You're going to do a lot of work collecting the information, talking to the experts, recording everything, making the slides for your educational webinars. Reuse that information. Use it for a live seminar. Use it for an e-newsletter. Use it in your blog. Make a video, a live video out of it. Repurpose that into other content. And if you pick your mission statement right, all of this other content would also support that knowledge marketing mission statement. So repurpose, that's the secret. Otherwise, you'll go crazy and you'll go in all kinds of different directions.
All right. Well, I think we are sort of at the end of our allotted time. Bruce, I know we got just a couple of quick slides to just talk about the next webinar coming up. So why don't you take us through those and we'll call it a day.
Okay. Thanks, Dan. Next webinar is on January 8th. It'll be at the same time, which is 11 a.m. Mountain Time. We'll talk about the first 4 steps, the first 4 of the total of 8 steps for the webinar production framework. And we'll provide this document to you as well. And the first 4 steps are: number 1, we talk more about planning and how important that is. And we talk about how you can best collaborate to come up with your topic and get your stakeholders on board and get as much buy-in as possible. We'll talk about collaborating about the audience, the metrics, the resources, the budget, and all those important things. We'll talk about how to pick the team, how to gain commitment from the team and keep them excited. And we'll talk about the tools about how you can produce and promote your webinar. If you like the way this sounds as far as the webinar series goes, feel free to reach out to me. There's my phone number or my email. Give me a call. I'll be glad to talk to you about your ideas, do some brainstorming, etc. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for showing up today and participating. We hope you found something useful. Hope to see you on the next one on January 8th. Thanks very much.